First of all, Professor Oh, since you are in South Korea, what do you think? Is the situation going to quiet down? Because after all, there are already two supporters of President Park now died as a result of the chaos.
Well, it's very lucky that we got only 2 people killed today instead of 20 or 200. So I think the things will calm down by tomorrow when the former President Park accepts the ruling from the High Court today.
Will she?
So we expect the normalcy from tomorrow, I think.
But the question is, will she?
Well, I think the ruling party has already accepted the ruling today, so I think it's a matter of time for it to accept it too.
All right, but time does matter, doesn't it, Professor Lee? We have seen suspensions from President Park trying to prolong her stay in the Blue House. Can she still have any way to do that anymore?
Well, Park Geun-hye rose to triumph by being elected back in 2012 as the first elected female leader, not only in Korean history, but in the history of the Sinic Confucian civilization. And this dramatic downfall is quite shocking to her. But it goes beyond self-embarrassment, personal embarrassment. Now she faces criminal indictment. So it's a major step forward for South Korean democracy, perhaps also a precedent for dampening that impulse on the part of government and big businesses to do shady deals, quid pro quo. But I think in the short term there'll be disarray, chaos, and it has strategic implications for approaching North Korea.
Well, of course, we're going to go into details about these talking points. But first of all, Professor Lee, I want you to be very brief about this because there's still debate going on in South Korea about whether this court constitution ruling is based on real legal merits or based on populism belief.
Well, I think there is that unshakable, inseparable link between public opinion, politics, and the legal order. But I think the Constitutional Court's ruling is unassailable. In terms of the politics and public opinion, Park Geun-hye had already lost her mandate to govern months ago. You have 10 million protesters by New Year's Eve calling for her resignation. And the fact that this was a unanimous decision, I think makes the case stronger that is in favor of the Constitutional Court.
Right, we are seeing some of the footages of the earlier chaos there right in front of the Blue House. But Professor Oh, what exactly is the nature of the division that we are seeing today right in front of the Blue House? It's not just about, I guess, supporting one president or against the one president, but rather what is going on in the Korean society. 70% support her being impeached. And yet we see some others quite strongly against it. Some say this is more about identity politics rather than her own governance, is it?
Well, I think this is a very strong minority politics case in Korean politics. These are a new display of generational gap between what we call Korean War generation and the new and post-war Korean generation. So those who are over 50 and 60 years old had a very strong, adamant attitude in favor of Park Geun-hye or her father, really.
Right.
And the rest of the population, 70 or 80% of Koreans, in favor of democracy. So this is more of a generational gap to me instead of right-wing, left-wing cleavage or regional cleavage or economic crisis, class cleavage is based on economic crisis.
Very interesting. Professor Lee, her father, the earlier President Park, of course, created so-called the miracle on the Han River. But he was an authoritarian figure, very controversial, eventually died as a result of being assassinated. So President Park comes into office in the glory of her father, and now she leaves office with the shadow of her father. How do you see this identity politics still going on now in South Korea?
I mentioned a moment ago that Park Geun-hye was the first female elected leader in Korean history. That is no indication of gender equity, equality in South Korea. She could not have been elected in 2012 had she not been the daughter of Park Geun-hye, who laid the foundation of South Korea's dramatic, even miraculous economic rise from being one of the poorest countries in the world in the 60s to a decent standard of living, as many South Koreans enjoyed by the time Park Geun-hye was assassinated in the late 70s. At the same time, I think Park Geun-hye, her way of governance, she's been accused of not being communicative, communicable, that is. People, her closest aides, many of them, even cabinet ministers, were not even given the opportunity to brief her in person. And I think this kind of denial now of criminal allegations on the part of Park Geun-hye is an extension of her leadership style, which is very inward-looking and rather divorced from public opinion.
Right. Of course, the South Koreans have made their decision, particularly the Constitutional Court and the Parliament. For us, elsewhere in the world, it's their decision. But Professor Wang, I know you're looking at what is going on in Seoul, not just thinking about the internal politics, but also its impact, really, on the Korean Peninsula. So many things boiling over on this peninsula. Ms. Park, with her leaving the office, with her being the strong supporter of the deployment of that system and also strong policies against DPRK, what would that mean?
Well, in the Korean politics, like in other democratic parties, there's the clock. If they go to extreme right, then back to the middle, and then even to the left. I think the President Park's policy, domestic policy, towards the North Korea, and then the many troubles. International policy, they have too much down on the U.S. and then start missile defense is also very controversial. And most importantly, I think the economy. The Korean economy competition, comparative advantages seems like also pressed, and not only from Japan, China, U.S. I think even they signed many FTA. So I think many difficulties because of their scandal, also because of the chaebol democracy. Big companies' impact of their politics. So as a new president, definitely need to reform our kind of policies.
Of course, at this point, I do want to go to our two other panelists about very important issue. That is, what would that mean for the South Korea's choice of how to deal with North Korea? I want to go to you, Professor Lee. I mean, we understand opposition party, leading candidate, Moon Jae-in, he talked about closer ties, even pledged to visit North Korea himself and dialogue with North Korea. After all of these things going on recently, do you think he will have an upper hand? As a result, will the policy change?
Independent of Mr. Moon's views on North Korea policy, he is the front runner, so I think it's his race to lose. South Korea will hold a presidential election within the next 60 or 59 days. At the same time, I think a famous French person said, "Après nous, le déluge," after us, chaos, the flood. Park Geun-hye's supporters have been saying that for some time. If she goes, then disaster in terms of North Korea policy. I don't think we are at such a great risk. We have many lessons from previous administrations' North Korea policy, this kind of blanket generous aid to North Korea. Giving North Korea unconditional aid has not produced the desired results. I think Mr. Moon will probably be more circumspect, even if he is elected president.
Professor Oh, of course, Mr. Moon, during his campaign, he's very strong, having a different position against President Park in terms of how to deal with North Korea. But that was during the campaign. So if he has a better chance, what would that mean for him? And also, he has a runner-up in his own party who is, of course, at this point, still have very different views about how to deal with North Korea. What do you think that means?
Well, I think he will maintain his traditional, conventional attitudes toward North Korea. That is basically he will return his visit to Pyongyang and shake hands with Kim Jong-un, and in a way to cool down the missile crisis or tension on the peninsula. So that's the change of the milieu in his own style. And that is also a affirmation of the continuity of opposition parties in dealing with North Korea. That's their trademark. And they have to maintain their trademark, and they have to emphasize its reality by going to North Korea and realizing bilateral dialogues again, apart from the six-party talks.
I see. Professor Lee, it seems that Professor Oh in South Korea right now have different views from you.
Well, whatever the future of South Korea's North Korea policy might be, you know, to say that Park Geun-hye was good on North Korea, so she should have stayed in office, is a bit like saying, I don't know, Richard Nixon, you remember, who reached out to China. He was very good on geopolitics, but despite the Watergate scandal, Nixon should have stayed on. You know, foreign policy is an extension of domestic politics, and Park Geun-hye had lost her mandate. The public's anger was not so much that Park Geun-hye has been guilty of criminal allegations, not so much that as that the high and mighty, the confirmation, it seemed, every day with revelations of new allegations, the confirmation that the high and mighty, the elites in South Korea, are above the law.
That's right.
That was the essence of the public's anger, and I think the public sentiment has been justified today.
But even still, let's focus on the strategic issue, Professor Wang. China is very concerned about that. Of course, President Park, at the end of her term, she's very strong on implementing that. And U.S. now pushing with the Trump administration. Implement it as soon as possible, even test it as early as next week before the next president could even say about anything against it. What do you think will be the next step? For China, what does that mean?
Well, yes, all the opposition parties, leaders, the candidates of the president are against the start deployment. I think it's very good for the stability of the region. But at the same time, we're not sure that this new president or candidate is strong enough or independent enough that because it's the American pressure, this is the global missile defense system. So just the use of the territory to deploy smart, and also maybe Japan also maybe follow. So that's I think the way concern.
Still have very strong concern. You don't know where the future is going to be. Professor Oh, maybe you can help us to better understand the situation as you see it. Thad, will that continue with a strong White House, it seems, and also at this point we see the coming up president, whoever that might be, 2 months' time, not able to establish a whole cabinet on his own or her own. So probably have to rely on the bureaucrats of this administration. All of this mixed up, what would that mean for SAT deployment and also politics regarding the Korean Peninsula? Professor Oh.
Well, yeah, the golden time to delay the deployment of THAAD has already been passed. So it is being now deployed and established, and it's going to continue to be so for a while, even though Moon Jae-in gets elected. So the issue with the THAAD has, really left the hands of the political leaders and bureaucrats here. It's in the hands of the American administration. And they are very strong and committed to the deployment and full deployment of THAAD missile defense system in Korea. So probably what the next president can do with the divided cabinet members and parliament in Korea is to assure North Korea and China and other neighboring countries that THAAD will be a safe deployment. It's not an aggressive deployment. It's going to be a defense system, and that will make the Northeast Asia safer than before.
That's going to be a challenge, isn't it, Professor Wang? At this point, what do you think China now, South Korea also seem to be in a trade war with the Lotte now having a lot of trouble in China, and some of the South Koreans also boycott Chinese products?
Well, because we want to influence what kind of SAD, not just SAD itself. I think that in a new presidency, maybe there is a negotiation between the South Korea and the United States over the SAD missile defense system. Either they have the wartime operational power shift from the U.S. to South Korea. If the new president denied to or postpone the deployment of the SAD, and the U.S. will want to hand over the wartime operation power to the South Korea, and then make the South Korea feel more pressure.
I see. It's very complicated story. Certainly, we'll have many other times to talk about this. But let's come back eventually at the end of discussion about this president. I mean, Park Geun-hye is the first democratically elected South Korean president who was removed from office, but she is not the first president who was embroiled in scandals. The son of former South Korean President Kim Il-sung, the first civilian leader of the country's modern democratic era, was found guilty of bribery and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The youngest son of former President Kim Dae-jung was arrested for bribery in an influence-peddling scandal. When Roh Moo-hyun's term ended, Mr. Roh was accused of bribery. He killed himself in 2009. Bribery scandals also hurt Lee Myung-bak's presidency. He left office 2013 with low approval ratings as well. One scandal after another. Before we go, very briefly from our two Korean panelists, the relations between business and politics still not clear, is it? Professor Oh.
Well, as I haven't always argued in my book, it's a mafia state. The state-business relations have been performed and maintained in the fashion like a mafia. So this decision today in the Constitutional Court makes a great historical monument in Korean history because it severed the tie between the state and business for the moment, because now no president is going to be safe by asking and demanding forcibly money from the Jebel. So Jebel is now in a triumphant moment by defending their property right from the highest Korean court, legal court.
I see. Professor Oh used a very dramatic word, mafia state. Of course, that's your personal opinion. Professor Lee, your final words on this as well.
I would reserve that expression for the North Korean regime, but perhaps this is politically incorrect. My last words are, I think this dismissal of Park Geun-hye has the makings of a watershed, a major event in Korean history and in South Korea's young democracy. Certainly, from the public's point of view, Choi Soon-sil, the shady character at the heart of this scandal, and President Park, and the major chaebol, like the leader, the de facto leader of Samsung, who is in jail right now, they were all in it together, and I think that perception is based on some realities. So I think this will become a precedent for dampening that urge, that way of the old way of doing things, collusion between big business and government, and getting away with it.